Welcome to the Head Smack Podcast. I'm Jeremy Slate.
You are listening to conversations with misfits, mavericks, and trailblazers.
Hey, welcome to the Head Smack Podcast. My name is Paul Pavoni, and I'm excited to have another misfit with me, Jeremy Slate. And he is the host of Create Your Own Life podcast, which studies the highest performers in the world. He studied literature at Oxford University, as well as holding a master's in early Roman Empire propaganda from Seton Hall University. His podcast is named the #1 podcast to listen to by Inc. magazine, as well as top 40 under 40 by Podcast magazine. Jeremy and his wife, Brielle, co-founded Command Your Brand, a new media public relations agency designed to help entrepreneurs share their message by appearing as guests on podcasts. He resides in Stillwater, New Jersey, where he raises chickens and is a former competitive powerlifter. Jeremy, welcome, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I got a little chuckle too, because before we started recording, I had totally butchered your name. So when you properly pronounced your name, I was laughing to myself here. So I don't know if anybody caught that.
Yeah. I've had so many different versions of it. Even people looking at it and writing it down, they want to add letters to it. They always want to add an I after the L, and so it's Pavolini. So it gives me a little bit of an Italian vibe.
Oh, nice! You make some good pasta, then, man.
Yeah. So I've had Pavlini, bologna, pepperoni, all kinds of versions.
When I was younger, I was a country for a little bit because younger kids can't pronounce Jeremy. So I was Germany for a while. So, I totally
Wow.
feel you from that perspective, man.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's quite the difference, Jeremy to Germany. But man, thanks for being on. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So, I read your bio, and it's quite a unique bio. Quite a few things that quite an adventure you've had up to this point. So, I usually like starting with origin stories and just kind of hearing a little bit about, the origins of Germany, Jeremy, and just hear a little bit about, where did things start and what brought you to the point that you're at now.
Yeah, so for me, my goal was always to be a college professor, and it's the thing I actually ended up not doing. I got my undergrad degree in Catholic theology and Judaism, and then I got my master's in the Roman Empire, purely because it wasn't like I was had this giant plan of what I was going to do with it. It was just oh, that's interesting. That's kind of how I got through college. I took a lot of courses that were interesting to me, and when I got out in 2011. I couldn't find any jobs that you could get with a PhD, right? Because I'm an MA, because I was overqualified for everything that you need a regular bachelor's degree for, and I was underqualified for everything you need a PhD for. So I was in this really weird, unhireable spot. So what do you do when you're in a situation like that? Well, immediately I started painting houses. So, I was working for a house painter, working on old 40-foot wood ladders. He insisted on doing everything by hand. So it was really grueling work. And, so I did that for about a year until I ended up finding a teaching job at a private school, because you don't really need any qualifications or anything like that. I think they literally just pull people off the street and say, teach the kids. Right. So that's what I ended up doing for about 2 years. And I'll tell you, man, I'm almost 40 now. So you can imagine in my early 20s, how young I looked. I had real trouble, I guess, getting the kids to be interested and respect me and all that kind of stuff. So it really did not go well. I burnt out really, really quick. And this is kind of early YouTube days where kids were trying to see how much they could piss me off and get it on video. So just my days were not fun. And
capture that viral video. Yeah.
In 2013, my mom ended up having a really bad stroke, and it made me look at a lot of what I was doing and realize I am not happy. I don't want to do this. I don't know what else I want to do. And I went through a number of different things. I did network marketing for a bit, and I didn't like the person I became in order to do that, because it was always trying to find a way to sell people my thing. And it just made me feel a little awkward. I sold life insurance for a while, which I was really good at, but I hated those death conversations. Sold products on Amazon, but I left my get my product for $1 code on my actual listing. So I lost all my products to the same person in about 20 minutes.
Oh, man.
And that was kind of the end of entrepreneur land for me. I ended up working at a friend's marketing firm building websites. And I started a podcast literally just as a hobby in 2014. And it absolutely took off. And that's kind of led us to the podcast being all over the place and, starting our company, Command Your Brand, in 2016.
So with these studies at Oxford and Seton, what led you to study those topics?
So for undergrad, I guess a little bit of it was laziness. I'm going to be honest. Like I went to Catholic school all the way through, so to kind of major in Catholic theology is really easy if you've been going to Catholic school for a really
Yeah,
long time.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like you just kind of
Right.
like,
It's ingrained in you. Yeah.
yeah, you know it's sleeping, so like you're just kind of like, all right, this is I can major in this. And I guess the issue I ran into when I graduated was that's not what I wanted to do for a living. And I'm like, what the hell do you do with this degree? And that's actually the
Right.
reason I ended up going to grad school. Cause I'm like, all right, well, I guess you do what you do, what I should have done the first time, which was have a history degree. Cause my real goal was to be a teacher.
Now, the studying of the Catholic, the studies of Catholic things, is that where what led you to the fascination and the direction of the Roman Empire? Did you study that, or is that one thing that led to the second thing?
So logistically, it should make sense because as the Western Roman Empire fades out, the Catholic Church kind of gets into more of a well-known and more powerful space. But that's not actually how it happened. I was absolutely obsessed with Alexander the Great. I thought
Oh,
he
wow.
was the most interesting historical character, and Roman emperors, for some reason, had this fascination with Alexander the Great as well, where they all wanted to be him and they all wanted to model themselves off of him. So they'd be like, "Oh, well, look, I found his breastplate," or, like I found his helmet. Like they'd have all these interesting things. So I read this one random article called Augustus at Actium, and the Battle of Actium is the final battle that ends the Roman Republic and begins the Roman Empire. And the first emperor Augustus actually goes to the Actium, which is the city in Greece, and prays before the sarcophagus of Alexander the Great, and allegedly breaks the nose off of it by mistake. We don't know if that's actually true, but I was like, that's so
Nobody owned
weird.
up to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, that's so weird. Why is this guy praying before the body of Alexander the Great? And the thing I actually understood is Augustus is the smartest propagandist to ever live. So he saw this as a propaganda opportunity to create a worship cult where people worshiped him for, well, not just him, but emperors for almost 500 years. So that was the thing that kind of sucked me into Rome, was this obsession with Alexander the Great, reading this one random article and just kind of going down a rabbit hole. I'm definitely like a rabbit hole studier, if that makes sense. Like I'll get on a subject and read everything about it.
I'm sure you'll have an AI for that as well. That's probably fueling that obsession as well.
I haven't figured out how to use AI to help me with that. I'm still like, I'm somebody that like, it took me a little bit to get into audiobooks, but I actually like the feel of an actual physical book. So I still do a lot of like physical book
Ah.
reading. I haven't figured out how to use AI to help me with that yet.
So initially, you did all that, you studied that, and you figured out there's no future in that. You kind of went into all these other professions. How did you
Yeah.
get into the marketing and the web design? It's so unrelated to everything else.
So
It's
okay,
such a
it's actually very
fascinating story.
it's actually very related. Here's why. Because as I mentioned, like kind of the last like entrepreneurial thing I did was um to launch a product on Amazon, which it was I'm very into coffee, so it was like a coffee related product, and it did
Yeah.
not do well, as I said, because we sold out of all of our inventory very quickly by mistake. And when you do something like that, I had to learn how to use Photoshop. I had to learn to use. This is when you built websites on different platforms. So I learned how to use Dreamweaver and things like that before I
Right,
ended up,
right.
actually learning WordPress and stuff. So to me, I had to learn these skills to be able to do some of those things I was doing, right? Because I was kind of a one-man band at that point.
Right, right. So yeah, do it yourself is a great motivator for figuring stuff out and how to do it yourself.
Yeah,
And
and then I
so
met somebody that needed, a web designer. I'm like, hey, I have taught myself CSS and HTML. I'm in. Let's do it. So that
yeah.
I supported myself right away.
And so, so you went into that. And so, now you've got your own agency and, you're helping people with their personal brands, helping them with podcasts, helping them with PR and stuff. What led you into that space?
I've been a podcast super fan forever. Like I've I'm trying to remember like what day I even started listening. Like I was like, so podcast started around 2004. Adam Curry, the guy that was actually on MTV in the 80s, is actually credited with being the podfather, or the guy that created podcasting. And I've been listening since like probably 2006, 2007 to what was called Adam Curry's Daily Source Code. And
Wow.
it was this podcast for people developing podcasts and like kind of coders. So that's what sucked me into the whole podcast world. And then I just kept listening to more and more and more shows. And eventually, when things didn't really work out for me, I was like, well, I need an outlet of some sort, right? Because I had tried for a number of years to be an entrepreneur, and a podcast was really just an outlet for me and just having a creative outlet. And I didn't expect it to be as successful as it was out of the gate.
Well, and even for me, I've listened to podcasts for a while. I used to listen to like Dignation and Gary Vee when he was still just kind of starting off and stuff, and I would just listen to them while I worked nonstop. So I've been a fan of podcasts for a while, but I never thought about doing my own until most recently. And so it's been only just a little over 2 months since I kind of launched out and did my own podcast. And because of that, I've had other people that have said, well, man, you've kind of inspired me to do my own as well, to
Oh, wow.
launch a podcast and things like that. And which is awesome, which I absolutely love that. And so with helping people with podcasts, what are some of the first things that you tell people when they say, I want to do a podcast too? It's so awesome that you're doing a podcast. I want to do one. What do you tell them?
Well, I think the first thing is the commitment level people have, because most people aren't going to commit long enough to make it successful. So I tell people be willing to be in it for a year and see no reward whatsoever, because there's a couple different things that have to happen in that time period. Number one, you have to find your own voice. It's going to take a little bit to figure out how you communicate as a podcaster. I think that is a
Right.
really, really vital thing. The other thing as well is, and this depends on what kind of a show you're doing. If you're doing an interview show, it takes a really long time to get good at being an interviewer, right? Like you have to learn how to write questions. You have to learn how to write a good follow-up question. You have to learn how to listen better. So I think that skill set takes a while to build. So if you come into it with some of those things kind of already in you, I think your learning curve could be shorter. But I think it's being willing to be in it for a year is really that commitment. And what's funny is, we've done well with my show. We've seen a lot of success, but I think, frankly, we've really hit critical mass in the last 6 months. And that's with a lot of this Roman Empire stuff hitting everything else, where now I'm actually going on the shows that I listen to, which is kind of wild to me.
Wow.
And I think people don't realize that they see that happen and they're like, wow, that's so great that's finally happening for you. That thing you went to college for paid off. And I think they don't realize an overnight success is doing the right things for 10 years every single day. And you know what I mean? Like if you look at it, like it's
so
literally
good.
almost been a decade I've been in podcasting, and
Right.
we've seen a lot of success. We've seen the things that, we've seen things I think that would quantify my podcast as successful. But I think we've only seen like the success I wanted to see literally in the last 6 months. So I think I think it takes a lot of work, and people don't understand that perspective on it.
Yeah, I think you're right, because one of the things that I've had to learn myself, and kind of like with you early on, is you just did it all yourself, and right now I'm doing it all myself. Like and part of it is just I want creative control, and I kind of am still formulating it myself of what I want to do. But it is a commitment. It is a commitment of time. It is a commitment of energy. It is a commitment of learning and being willing to adjust and tweak and fix things, adjust things as you're going along. But, for somebody that might have just heard that and said, oh man, forget that, I don't want to do a podcast. Like what's the base entry into it for somebody that's like, but I thought I wanted to do it, but man, that sounds a little terrifying. What's the lowest point of entry for somebody that wants to do a podcast?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to decide if it's the right fit for you, right? Like, and I think because there's a lot of people who say, hey, you should start a podcast and you should be out there podcasting. And I think for most people, it probably actually isn't the right fit. And one part of it is you have to be able to carry on a conversation. I think that's important. You have to be able to make that conversation interesting and useful to others, which is another skill to learn. But also as well, there's the business aspect of it. And I think if you don't have a business that your podcast supports, you have to kind of be okay with it really just being a hobby. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think to actually start a podcast and think like, you're going to get 1 million listens an episode and you're going to start selling ads and people are going to be, buying these food services and stuff off of your show. Like for most people, that's not the case. So to me, I think the best use case of a podcast is it's like a PR vehicle where people know you, like you, and trust you because of you having these conversations, and it increases your authority. So to me, I think it sits better with a business you already have, right? I think for most people, unless you're okay with it being a hobby and just something you do, which some people are okay with that, and that's fine. Like,
right.
I know plenty of history podcasters that have these little shows that do these really great episodes that I listen to, and they've been doing it for years, and it's just like a hobby, right? But I
Yeah.
think for most people, they start at thinking they're going to be Joe Rogan, and that's not the case. It should be something that supports what you're already doing if you really do want to do something that has staying power. Now, when you're looking at the barrier of entry, the number one thing I think you need to be doing right now is video. And I think we're doing this podcast right now in Riverside, which in my opinion is the best video recording platform out there.
Yeah.
Zoom turns down your quality in audio and video, and you could have that problem where if somebody's internet connection is terrible, you're going to have a really bad interview. And I think you have to think of
Right.
the quality you're putting out for people. So your barrier to entry, Riverside is not super expensive. What is it, like $30 a month or something like that if you get the pro
Right.
level? So I think something like that, a decent mic, and even just a decent webcam, because I don't know how Windows PCs are because I've been on Mac forever, but I know like Mac, it wasn't even until recently that they put a better camera than 720p on these laptops, and
Right.
even so you're not getting great video. So even just a decent webcam would help. But I
Right.
think those few things and understanding where this fits in kind of the broader picture of things you want to do, I think will set you up for success.
Yeah, I absolutely love where you started with that is understand your why and why you're doing this. Is it simply as an outlet? You have ideas, you have thoughts, you have things that inspire you, you have things that you're fixated on, things
Mm-hmm.
that you feel you can share with others that would help them out. And you just want to do a podcast. So, and you just want to kind of put it out there. And if you're fine with that, and it's not about the numbers. It's not about, selling ads. It's not about all that stuff. Is understanding your why makes a big difference in keeping you going. Because, if your why is one thing and then you start thinking, well, I want to start selling ads. And, then you start getting frustrated because you're not getting the viewership and you're not getting the attention. And you forget your why quickly along the way, and then you get frustrated. And so I think
Yeah.
what you said is so true, is understand what you're doing, tie it into a business, if it is related to your business, and turn it into that. So when it comes to, you mentioned
Well,
video.
can I add one? Can I add one thing on that too before
Oh,
you move on? 'Cause
absolutely.
I think there's an important point too, and because I think when people like for people the holy grail is getting ads on their show, and for most people you have to understand how advertising works, because what happens is the old world radio and other metrics is what they're applying to podcasting right now. I hope that changes in the future, but it's based on the number of 1,000 listeners you have. So let's say, for example, you have 1,000 listens to an episode, and it's usually like after 30 days. What they'll pay you is per number of thousands you get. So if you have 5,000 listens, that's 5/1000s, and they'll usually pay like $25 per thousand. Like the going rate's anywhere between $25 and $35. So if you have 5,000 listens to an episode, 25 times 5 is $125. Like you're not making a lot of money off
Right.
podcast,
Right.
off of advertising. For most podcasts, I think the way that you do well, and still to this day, even with bigger traffic, the way we do well is we do affiliate deals. Like that's the thing we actually do the best with. Like what products do I like the most and do I use on a daily basis, and have a great commission, right? Because I think if they don't have a great commission system, I might love them, but we also need to benefit off them. So for us, that's how our show has generated most of its money. In addition to promoting my business, is people buy the products that I like and use, and we get great commission off of them. So I think to most shows, that's better play than advertising. But continue. I wanted to add that because I think it's important.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And so it's you find a coffee brand, you find a whatever, and they have a great affiliate program, and you just mention them on your podcast. Is that right? Or are
Yeah.
you running some sort of a different kind of ad way to promote it?
So what I'll typically do, so like I have a couple different products I use. Like I use the wellness company's products a lot. I use Brave Health's products a lot. There's a couple coffee products I use, and so what I do is those companies already have affiliate programs. Their commissions are good, where they're paying like anywhere to 25% or 50% on a sale. So like you sell a product, you're doing okay. And there are things that I use. So I'll talk about my personal experience. Like,
Right.
I've learned this. And the cool thing about it, and this actually, this happens every day, is I'll get emails from listeners asking me questions about the products because I actually use these products, right? And I think
Right.
that's the
Right.
difference. Like I don't promote things I don't use. So that's typically how I'm doing it. Sometimes they'll send me like a commercial segment, which I might use and then still add my experience to it. But a lot of times it's just me kind of riffing on why I like a product.
Well, and that feels probably a little more natural than trying to be selling, like the hard
Yeah.
sell of something that you don't even really use or you're not familiar with. It's just somebody's paid you some money to promote it. So it's a different vibe as well, and probably feels a little more authentic to your brand as well. Is I'm guessing, right?
No, absolutely. And because I think the thing you have to consider is if you promote something like that you don't like or you don't use, like how damaging is that to your brand? Because
Yeah,
like yes, you want to make money and you want to have your podcast do well and pay off for the work you're doing. But at the same time, you have to consider, am I doing damage to my brand with how I'm actually going about what I'm doing?
right. Aligning to something that you're not familiar with and don't know anything about and don't really care about, and is just for the money. And I think people sense that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about YouTube, because you had mentioned video, how powerful video is, and for my podcast, I've started putting some video out on YouTube, but it's kind of the whole thing of doing it all yourself is you only have so much time, right?
Yeah.
And so I've started putting it out there. So talk to me about the value of putting it on YouTube and video. You'd mentioned that, so let's talk about that for a little bit.
Well, it's discoverability because I think, like, once again, I've had a podcast for 10 years. I know how darn hard it is to grow an audio only podcast because for most platforms, there's no algorithm for audio. You just got to hope people talk about it and share it and whatever, or you're answering a search query on one of these platforms. So audio is really, really hard to grow. Video, if you think about YouTube, YouTube is the number 2 search engine after the world, after another Google property, which is Google itself, right? So I
Right.
think you have to be thinking of, even if you're not going to have people viewing your podcast on YouTube, it's very important for discoverability, like people finding you. But you have to understand too, how do you optimize a video? Because there's ways to get it found better than just throwing up a video and hoping and praying. Number one is your title. A really, really good title is actually going to help you show up in search and help you get what are called impressions, or people actually viewing that podcast in a list with other videos. But then the thing that makes people click on it is a really good thumbnail that creates something called CTR, click through rate. So you want to have a thumbnail that says, "Oh, I want to watch Paul's episode over this video." So if you can start working on those things, and there's some great tools out there to help you with that. One is called Taja.ai, TAJA.ai. And it'll actually, if you put in the link to an unlisted YouTube video, because once you've published a YouTube video, it's already hit the YouTube algorithm. You're better off kind of doing it as part of your publication process, though. It's not a bad idea if you already had a video out there to start optimizing it, because it can't hurt you. But I'm thinking of like kind of, you get the most boosts of video when you first publish it. So you
Wow.
can put the link to this unpublished video, and what it'll do is it'll write the title for you. It'll write the description for you. It'll give you the right tags. It'll write the chapters so that they're timestamp chapters. And it'll give you like thumbnails you can work with. Now, a lot of times those thumbnails like have misspellings in them because AI can't spell, and there might be some things about them you
Right.
don't like. Or if the podcast is about a person, it's going to put an image of a person that's likely not the person that you're talking about on it. So that what we'll do is we'll take that thumbnail and bring it into Canva, because Canva's AI tools are incredible, and you can actually remove text or edit text in an image in Canva, and you can silhouette out people's photos and stuff like that. So I was a big Photoshop power user for years, but Canva's tools now are so simple and allow me to do things that take a lot more work on Photoshop, that we've moved most of our work to Canva now. So if you can learn how to optimize better, there's also another really great app that we use as well, called vidIQ. And vidIQ
Okay.
scores videos out of 100. So what we'll typically do is run it through Taja first to help us write the copy, and then we'll run it through vidIQ to get the score better. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like we're doing the best job we can
Right.
there.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing that I've looked at when it comes to even my podcast. Is right now I'm using the guest name as kind of the title. That's
Well,
what I've
unless they're well
focused on.
known, you're missing out on a lot there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
that's the thing that's hurting you. Is unless people are looking for that person, it's going to make it harder to find.
Yeah, that's what I'm figuring out, that I probably should have the title or the subject a little more prominent in what's being discussed, because I'm seeing the downloads, I'm seeing what people are clicking on, and it's not having the reach that I want. And so that's a great tip. So if
We
you're
found controversial headlines to work best, like things that are like, wait, he said what? Like controversial headlines are really good. And the thing you want to consider too, like I think YouTube gives you 100 characters. your limit to where you're actually doing well is somewhere around 70. If you use the full 100, it's likely not helping you to use those last 30. If you can keep a good title, like the title you have to understand is it has to create interest, like, oh my gosh, he said what? But you
Right.
also have to be able to understand what the heck you're saying. So if people are using like a complex statement where people are like, wait, he did what? But what is that? Like, it creates a confusion. So there's a lot you have to do in those 70 characters.
Wow. And so for somebody like me or somebody that's already launched their podcast, they kind of went in there scrappy, kind of like I did, and they're like, okay, well now I got to use this AI app to change my titles, or come up with new titles. Are they penalized for changing it at this point,
No,
or okay, so all
no,
right, that's
it's because there's a couple different ways you can go about it. Number one, you never want to delete a video from YouTube because YouTube also removes the views and it can harm your channel. But what you can do is like let's say you want to relaunch the episode, because that could be one strategy you could do. Like, hey, we did it, but we didn't do it right the first time, so let's just take advantage of the new episode launch algorithm. Make that other video private. So it's private, but it's meaning it's not searchable or viewable. It's viewable only to you, but the algorithm doesn't look at that video. So then you could just relaunch it, or you could just go back and just start optimizing all your old videos. Like, we've had videos that are a year old just start to take off out of nowhere because we optimized them. So there's kind of no right way or wrong way to do it. It just kind of depends on how you want to go about it.
right. And the key is to change it to be more effective. And so how would you split test? Do you split test things like that at all? Do you put two versions of it with different titles? Like how
So
would
the reason, and that's the reason that if you're going to repost a video, you want to go private, is YouTube hates duplicate content. So they'll
uh
penalize you for duplicate content. A feature they did add recently is a thumbnail testing feature where you can actually split test thumbnails. The thing I don't like about it is it's for 2 weeks. And most of the time with a brand new video, your window is kind of like the first 36 hours. So by the time I know a thumbnail works, I've kind of lost steam on it. vidIQ and also what's the other one? TubeBuddy have thumbnail testing features, because to me, you want to know which thumbnail's the good one before you actually launch the video. Because by the time the video's out, if you're already testing, you're kind of losing the ability to benefit off that first 36 to 72 hours of video being out.
So, so for the person that, is listening to this and they're like, okay, this is amazing. I love that you've shared some AI tools because AI is just changing everything. For somebody that's going to go into doing a podcast and they just feel like it's a little overwhelming. There are a lot of AI tools, and they're getting better. Like you mentioned, some of them have terrible text. They're still not quite
Dude,
there.
everything in AI looks Russian. I don't know why. Like, it's like is that Cyrillic? What were you doing?
Yeah. It's like they ran it through a foreign language filter, and it's just like not even regular characters. And so it's getting better. We had the issues with the multiple fingers, early on, and so it's doing a little better when it comes to even word creation. But I think for some people, the biggest struggle is even because you can get away with scrappy thumbnails a little bit, but titles and the words are pretty critical, and having an AI that can at least get you to 80-90% there is always a high value thing. So what are some other ways that you've found that helps grow an audience? You'd mentioned having the right titles. You mentioned a great thumbnail. You mentioned getting on YouTube. What are some other ways to grow an audience?
So I've done a lot on people used to call it Twitter, now they call it X. Like, we've done a lot on there. I actually like their ad platforms, like, really robust. So what we'll typically do is target followers of someone that's similar to the like let's say we interview somebody that has a large following. We'll target their followers in a small ad set. Now, let's say the person we interview doesn't have a large following, but their thought processes have a similar audience to someone else, right? Like, let's say maybe your guest is like Lewis Howes, who has a big audience. So you can still target Lewis Howes and people that follow him to run your ads. So we've found that's actually been pretty successful, is running small ad sets on X. We haven't seen a difference between a video ad and an audio ad, because a lot of times you have to understand, like, these platforms want to keep people on the platform. So kind of the best thing you can do is you have to pick a result when you're creating an ad. So link clicks is what we'll go for a lot of times.
Right.
And that's work the best. Um, we've also started producing in the last year more content on Rumble, and we found that Rumble prefers live streamed content. So
Wow.
I don't like live streaming. So because it's just my schedule is crazy and everything else, and I got kids, so it's like what we'll typically do is consistently live stream our new episodes on launch day on Rumble. We'll use StreamYard to do that with a pre-recorded file. So that's been another really good thing to grow that platform specifically. Rumble is a bit harder because what I've found is unless you came to it with an established audience, it's harder to build an audience. That's why people like a lot of these big YouTubers that have come there have it's worked out for them because they already have 1 million followers. So like it's easier
Right.
to
Right.
convert people to there. But what I've found is if you do a live, you do get promoted more to people watching the platform. So it's for them, it's really just search optimization and doing lives. Those are really the things we're doing. We're also doing a lot of like video clips and stuff like that too. We use a tool called video.ai. VIDYO.ai. And what it'll do is take a look at a video and create the shorts and the segments and everything else. It's similar to Opus Clips, but the thing that I actually like is that it creates these longer, like chapter style videos, which are what we like for one day I'll post a full video on YouTube and the next day I'll post a segment of a video. So it helps us figure that out. We used to have to do it manually and it wastes a lot of time. So for us, those are most of the things we're doing. And in addition to, continually telling our email list what we're doing.
Yeah, I love what you said about the social media, because I was curious as to, when it comes to social, of course, like you said, they want to keep you on the platform. They also throttle you just promoting your podcast without paying to promote it, and
That's
so
correct.
it's not going to get the visibility, and so paying to promote your video is a key strategy. It's if you just simply think, if I'm just going to post about my latest podcast, I'm just going to share the latest episode on social media, and
Mhm.
that's all I'm doing, it's not going to get any reach. It'd probably get very little reach, right?
That's an important point too, because I know like even on YouTube, like in testing with our account and the other accounts we manage, there's a tab under when you go to the content tab on YouTube, there's a tab called promotions. And that's where you can actually like pay to promote a video on YouTube system. It'll find channels like yours or videos like yours and promote to those. Um, Even just doing a small budget on promotions, like let's say like $25 a week, other videos unrelated to that video will do better just because you're giving YouTube money. Does that, if that makes sense? Like you'll
Right,
have
right.
videos that have no connection to that video, but are on the same channel that'll just start doing well organically because you're giving them money.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole thing is you pay for exposure on these channels. It's not for free. It's
Yeah.
you don't get the reach. And that's one of the things that I think is frustrating for a lot of people is they grow an audience on social media and they think simply by posting things that their audience is going to see it, but they actually don't. They only a small percentage of the people that actually follow you see it, because the social media companies, they want you to pay to get it out there. So when it comes to some advertising strategies, you talked about some. What are some for as far as for a podcaster, whatever the size they are, whether they're a big podcaster or a small podcaster, what would you recommend would be some of the things that they should start with? They're not going to be able to go full blown. They're not going to be able to go as big as maybe a larger podcaster can. But what are some of the smaller ones, smaller strategies that they could do as well? And you've shared some. What are some others?
Like honestly, the ones I've already covered are the best ones to do because I
Yeah.
guess there's a lot of different stuff you could do that's like a lot more complex. But you need a big budget. You need somebody managing it full time. Like you could do some stuff with Google Ads with retargeting, but it's a lot more complex. I think, frankly, the best bang for your buck right now is a small budget on the promotions tab on YouTube, just because you're going to see like, yeah, you're likely going to kill the average view duration on the video you're promoting since it's to a less engaged audience, but you're going to see other videos on your channel unrelated to that one do well. So I would think even a small budget there is the best one you can do. Now there's like different goals you can have with those ads. There's views or channel engagement. I find the channel engagement ad is what pays off the best versus just straight views, because a lot of times either one of those ads you're going to kill your view duration, right? Because you're being promoted to a larger audience that doesn't care as much about your content. It might pull in some people that care about your content, and that's great, but you're going to do better with the rest of your channel doing well if you use the engagement option.
Talk a little bit about that. What does that mean, the engagement option?
So that means like you're promoting your video so that people engage with your channel as a whole. That's why like if you pay for that video, there's I guess to backtrack. Do you know what I mean by view duration? Like the average amount of time somebody watches a
Right,
video?
right,
Okay,
right.
so when you have a good video, you want to have a great click-through rate, above 5%. Hopefully, if you can get 7 to 10%, that's great. But you also want a good average view duration. So like, let's say you have for me, I have a 60-minute episode I do on YouTube. We're going to have a 19 to 22-minute view duration on that, which is great. Organically, it's doing well and people are watching that. Now, if you start running paid traffic at it through the promotions tab, you're going to see that view duration drop. It might drop to 6 or 7 minutes because you're bringing in some people that care, a lot of people that don't. But
Right,
what'll
right.
happen is you're going to see that because of that, it drives engagement on your other videos. So that means people commenting on your videos, liking your videos, new people possibly viewing your videos. So that's what I mean by engagement. It's people actually engaging with your content rather than just like, hey, viewing this video and leaving.
Right. So, when it comes to, doing a podcast, the world is flooded with podcasts, and we seem to
Yeah.
think that, is my voice going to matter? Is it going to be heard? What are some statistics that you've seen around podcasting that could encourage the person that might be like, am I entering like a flooded channel? Am I, is it worth doing something like that? Why should I do it?
So you have to think there's about 3 million podcasts out there. And it depends on what platform you look at. Like we're somewhere between 3 and 3.5 million. But out of that, you only have about 19% that actually consistently produce content at least once a month. So right out of the gate,
Wow.
81% of all your competitors are gone, right? Because there's a lot of like what are called pod faded shows out of there, meaning shows that have started and then they just, for some reason, still pay their hosting, or maybe they're on Spotify for podcasters, which is free hosting. So they
Or
don't.
they've forgotten that about
Yeah,
it. They're paying and they don't even realize. Yeah.
exactly. Like their podcast is still out there for some reason. 81% of people have done that. So you're within a 19% if you just at least consistently are producing an episode at least once a month. So I think that's one part of it. The other part about it as well is, and this is, believe it or not, gotten better over the last couple of years. It used to be the top 5% of all podcasts were episodes that get 100 listens or more an episode. In the last couple of years, it's become episodes that get 1,000 views or more an episode in the top 5%. So
Wow.
if you could be in the top 20%, you don't have to do much to be in the top 5%, and you can be doing pretty well, right? Like, I think a lot of times the biggest success tip is to just not quit, right? Like if you could just
Right,
keep going,
right.
keep doing something and find something that's manageable for you, as long as you're not, like nails on a chalkboard to listen to, you're going to see something doing well eventually.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to what we talked about. Also, your why, I think, is important. Why you're doing the podcast. Why does it matter to you? Who are you trying to reach? What message are you trying to reach them with? And it can feel sometimes, oh man, it's just so overwhelming, and so many people are in the space. But like you shared, it's not as many as you think. And if you have a unique message, if you have something to share, if you have something that you feel very strongly about, or you're passionate about, you'll find an audience. And if you're
Yeah,
fine with that audience being whatever size, because your why is strong enough, then it really doesn't matter how flooded this space is. And
that's
I think
correct.
in a time where there is so many voices out there, your voice might be the one that people need to hear. Your voice might be the one that people need to listen to, especially in a media saturated culture. I think there's opportunities there, right? And so, talk to me about a little bit about the why and media, and how media is this is an opportunity for you to put your stuff out there in contrast to what's happening in the culture.
Well, so I think the thing you have to consider, and I guess this isn't a political point. It's a old media versus new media point. So
Right.
I don't know when you're releasing this, but in the U.S., our presidential debate, the first one for the year is tomorrow, and CNN actually put out a statement that if anybody that's not traditional media, so they're licensing Fox News, they're licensing a lot of their competitors to allow to simulcast their debate and comment on it. They're not allowing YouTubers and TikTokers and people on X and people on Rumble to simulcast it and to comment on it. Now, There have been other people that have been like, oh, it has something to do with the president and everything else. I actually think that's not the point. The point is old media versus new media. They're seeing a lot of us in the podcast world and a lot of us in the YouTube world start to take the lion's share of media, and they're seeing how their numbers are going down. It's actually just a self-preservation move. So I
Yeah.
think, to me, what we're seeing is kind of legacy media thinking they were the gatekeepers, and that's just not really the case anymore. It's actually people are coming to people like you and I to get our opinions on things or to learn about things. And it's not that somebody goes and waits for appointment viewing television anymore. They
Yeah.
watch something when they want to watch it, right? Like, sure, maybe somebody live streams that debate and comments on it, but likely people are going to watch it the next day. They're not going to
Yeah.
tune into a television channel when people have to tell them they watch it. And I think that's similar to why you've seen Netflix do well and you've seen Disney Plus do well and these other platforms do well, is because the market has become very consumer driven. It's what the consumer wants, when the consumer wants it, and how much the consumer wants of it. And I think that's why podcasts, YouTube, and these things we call new media are capitalizing and doing very, very well, because we're seeing a change in the old guard. And the funny thing is, this change has been happening for the last 10 years or more. They still don't know what to do with it. I think that's the funnier part.
Right, right. I love that. I love that term that you use. I hadn't heard anybody use that before. Is the appointment scheduled programming? And what did you say?
Because like it's I don't know, maybe you have an accent, Paul. What, are you from Australia or where are you
Yeah,
from?
yeah. I was raised
Okay.
in Australia.
So it might just be like an American cultural term. I don't know, but like back in the day, right? Like, let's say Friends was on.
Right.
A new episode of Friends was on this week, and it would be appointment viewing television. All of
Right.
your friends would get together and they'd watch that episode of Friends and they would talk about it. And that's how like media was really run here in the U.S. for a long time. And that's why you're seeing most of the series are now, they're on Netflix and they're on
Yeah.
Prime and they're on these different things, because people don't want to do that. They
Right.
want to watch it when they want to watch it. They don't want to be told when they have to watch it. So what's called appointment viewing television isn't really a cultural thing anymore, but it used to be a huge
Right.
cultural thing.
Right, right. Yeah, and I love that term because it has so radically changed culture-wise. Is we want to consume when we want to consume. We want to consume
Yes.
what we want to consume when we want to consume it at our schedule, at our time. And the whole idea of making an appointment to get content just doesn't. It's not how we are anymore. We are just so self-satisfying. I want it now. I want it my way. I want it this way. And I think the podcasting and kind of taking it back to podcasting,
Yeah.
is you get what you want when you want it.
Correct.
And if you're a podcaster, you get to say what you want, how you want it, and people are going to be interested in that. They want it, like you said, they want to hear your take on stuff.
Mhm.
And so the opportunity is there, whatever the topic is, that you're going to find an audience that, that was going to care about your view of certain things.
Yeah.
And I think that makes, that makes the opportunities for podcasters even greater. Is, if you have a unique view, if you have a unique opinion, unique take, and your background that formulates that unique take, is the opportunities are there for you to have a podcast and for you to grow an audience through doing that.
And I think that's important too, because what happened, and this is once again like why I think it's more of a gatekeeper thing than a political point. Like, legacy media used to get to decide what you believed and what you watched. And
Right.
back in the day, I think there were like 4 networks and you could watch
Right.
whatever these 4 networks said at the exact same time. It got a little bit different when we got cable. Even more different we got direct, when things like DirecTV and Dish and things like that happen. But now online, there's hundreds of thousands of viewpoints, right? And you can find the narrative can't be controlled by media anymore. And I think that's what's really interesting, is people can really decide what they want to listen to and who they want to listen to it from. They're not told what they have to believe or think or look at.
I love that. And I think that's a good transitional thing to also take it back to the Roman Empire discussion.
Yeah.
Because the control of the narrative, the control of information, and recently there's been a lot of talk is men really thinking about the Roman Empire every single day. And so how do you see where we are right now as a culture as it ties back to what was happening in the Roman Empire? Are there similarities, and what are they?
So I think the thing you look at, and I guess to bring this full circle back to where we started, Augustus was the first emperor. And the thing he did is he was a brilliant propagandist. And this is how he was able to control people early on. Now, he's the first emperor of nearly 100 emperors, right? So it takes a long time before we get to 476 when things take a bad left turn. But like the things he did is like he put his face on coins because then when people use coins, they thought of Augustus. You know, it's such an easy way to put
Right.
propaganda in people's minds that they're using your face every day to pay for things. So that's one thing. There were statues of him around the empire. And even when he wasn't a very healthy guy in his older years, like, you know, didn't really have any teeth. He'd lost most of his hair. He had a bit of a weight problem later in life. All the statues are, if people want to Google it, there's a statue called the Augustus of Prima Porta. If you've ever been to Las Vegas, it's that big one you're going to see in Vegas. All of the statues are very similar to that one, where he's about 30 years old. He's at the peak of his health. He looks very handsome. And it shows people like, oh, he must be divine because he doesn't age. All of these statues we see of Augustus, he's always this young, vibrant guy. And so
Wow.
his ability to run propaganda was brilliant. And I think that's a lot of how media tries to control us, you know, in the way we do our movies and revisionist history and things like that. It's a lot of the way that, you know, television tries to control us and things like that. We use very similar ideas in the way that we work people. Now, if you want to look at kind of where we're at in terms of like how things are going, Rome has almost 1,000-year history, starting in 753 BC, and then in the West it falls in 476. In the East, which is the Byzantine Empire, but they would have called themselves Romans, it lasts till 1453. So it's a very, very long history. And
Wow.
I'm speaking really only of America, not really of other countries, just because I'm looking at how our economy is at the moment. I put us in what's called the crisis of the third century. And this is where to pay for wars, to pay for the military, to pay for all these different things, they were adding different metals to the currency. They were bringing in foreigners to fight in the army. And they were really destroying their currency and what it meant to be Roman. So if you want to look at that,
Wow.
there's kind of a 175-year downfall from that period. But that's kind of squarely where I put historically what's happening in the US right now. They had 15,000% inflation by 284 AD. We're not there
Wow.
yet, but when you don't have a currency that is a currency you can count on, you don't have a country. And I think this is actually one of the things that the EU has really struggled with. The euro has really hurt a lot of countries' national sovereignty because, sure, they have the ability to trade across borders, but it's also impoverished a lot of countries that their economy is very different than other countries.
Wow. Wow. And so what led to the eventual downfall?
There's a few different things, but I think number one, the inflation point, because when you don't have a currency anymore, and they had started in the early third century bringing in other like tribes into Rome to actually fight in the army, because you have this idea where Roman emperors were actually being declared by their armies, and they were realizing, okay, so I get power by an army. So you have like 47 different guys in a less than 50-year period claim to be emperor. So they would pay their army more, and they'd have to debase the currency to do that, but they didn't have enough people, so they bring in other tribes to do that. So you have what starts to happen is the money's declining. More people are coming in that don't really have a buy-in to the system. So when the money no longer can pay these people that are just continually coming into the empire, and the currency collapses, well, you have by the 5th century, the people in charge aren't even Romans anymore. It's basically
Wow.
transitioned to barbarian rule, and the last 5 or so emperors are just puppets. They're puppet emperors actually ruled by a barbarian king. And at 476, when it falls, I think there's these. I was talking to a kid at the gym about this. I'm like, oh, that's a really cool weight belt you have on. I'm like, what is that? He goes, oh, it's the fall of the Roman Empire, and like everything's on fire. And I'm like, you know, that's likely not how it happened, right? Like what just basically happened is there was a final child emperor named Romulus Augustulus, and he was being controlled by a barbarian king named Odoacer. The currency didn't have any power anymore. The emperor didn't have any power anymore. And he was basically like, you know what, kid, we're going to retire you. We're going to give you some money. You go live over there. You're not the emperor anymore. I'm the king of Italy. And that was just how it ended. Now, when we hear about the fall of Rome, it's because the Eastern Roman Empire in the late 5th century decides, I want to rule the whole thing again. And he burns it down to basically try and reunite it. So it's very
Wow.
interesting how we get there.
Wow. 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 So it wasn't a big moment. It was a lot of little moments that led to
Correct.
the downfall, right? And
Hundreds of years of you know, a lot of little moments, a lot of bad rule. Like you don't get there overnight. You get there by bad policies. You get there by Like in the last 100 years, they had a number of child rulers because, like, the father would die or be assassinated, and you would need to have like somebody they could look at as an emperor. So you just have this
Right.
series of bad events over hundreds of years, and eventually you don't have an empire anymore.
Yeah, and I think that that speaks to not only culture. I think it speaks to governments, but I think it also speaks to just personal life. Is
Yeah,
sometimes we think it's going to be this big thing, this super dramatic thing that changes everything, but sometimes
correct.
it's even just those little decisions that we make along the way, those little battles that we don't stand up and fight, those little things that we don't put guards against, that suddenly leads us to a place that we just never imagined being. And
Yeah,
so I think all of life is very much like that.
yeah, because I know even actually as we're recording this, I just got texted about some breaking news that in the U.S. The Supreme Court just ruled that the government is allowed to now regulate social media companies. They're allowed to tell them what they can and can't post. So, and
Wow.
you don't get there overnight. Like, these court cases have been going on for 5 years, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's these things that happen for time and time and time again, and eventually you get to something, but you get to something over a long period of time.
Right. Yeah, it's precedent upon precedent upon precedent upon
Correct.
precedent. The line keeps getting moved, and because the line is moved so gradually, we almost don't see it that it's moved. It's kind of like
Yeah.
seeing the laying on the beach and the tide coming in. You just don't
Yeah.
notice how close it's getting to you until you're like, oh my goodness, we got to get up and move now.
Well, and I think even too, like, you look at the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 in Russia, and I think a lot of people look at that and they're like, okay, so this violent event happened, right? Okay, but that was the crescendo. That was what we got to. The
Yeah.
Bolsheviks had slowly been coming into the country over about 30 years and taking political positions and taking over the Soviets and all these different things, and eventually it leads to a revolution. But you don't get there. Like, even the American Revolution, people talk about 1776 and freedom. It was several generations of fighting that
Yeah.
lead to 1776, but America's not free until 1790. You know what I mean? So it's like it's a series of events that lead you to something. There's typically a crescendo that gets at the end, but there's a build up.
Right. Well, and we see this happening all over the world with the illegal immigration that's happening in a lot
Yeah,
of places. That it feels like it's not that big of a deal. It feels like it's okay. We'll be fine. But some of that stuff is these gradual step by step things that lead you to a place that you never imagined.
that's correct. Well, and I think that's the issue too. Is it's like you, and I guess just to step it back, like, there's nothing wrong with immigration. Like, I
Right.
didn't just spontaneously arrive here in this country. My family came here, 100
Yeah.
years ago.
I'm a first
There,
generation immigrant. Yeah.
yeah. So but there's a legal way and an illegal way to do it, right? There's a legal channel, and you go through legal channels and you do whatever it may be. If you need to claim asylum, you try to do that, whatever it might be. But I think when you overwhelm these countries, you destroy what it means to be a country, and that's
Right.
exactly what happened to Rome. Is we started taking in people to serve in the army. They started taking in, people from the provinces, and I think the thing people don't know about Rome as well is they had a lot of social programs where, in 133 BC, there's two brothers called the Gracchi brothers, and they actually institute a program to start feeding all the people in the Roman Empire. So if you lived in the empire, they fed you. So, like,
Wow.
you're starting to see, like, the more people come in, they didn't want to destroy the thing, they didn't want to break the thing, they wanted the benefits of it. But eventually, those benefits and poor currency are going to kill you, and I think that's what you're seeing globally.
Wow. Well, man, I know we could probably talk for hours about the Roman Empire. It's so fascinating. I mean, it
Yeah,
really is such a case study, such an amazing part of history, such a place that we can learn so much. And I want to take from that and kind of tie in everything that we've talked about today. What happened with the Roman Empire was this gradual thing that led to their downfall.
hmm,
And I think for our personal life, I think for everything that we're doing is watching the precedents that are being set along the way for positive or negative.
yeah,
And so, we kind of started off talking about launching a podcast. You think it's going to be this big, great thing, like I'm going to launch and Joe Rogan's going to be like nervous, like,
yeah,
and you think, it's going to be this big, fantastic thing. But sometimes it's just this step by step, by work, by daily, working on things, listening to things like this, executing on the stuff that Jeremy shared and saying, okay, I'm going to check out those AI apps. I'm going to check out those services. I'm going to make some changes to things I'm doing. But it's these steps along the way that get you to a place where you find success. And Jeremy shared about 10 years of grind to become an overnight success, right?
Yeah.
And so I think even with our life is watching those small steps, whether in a positive direction or a negative direction, that lead to the place that either we want to go or can lead us to a place that we never imagined will end up because we're not watching those little steps. So Jeremy, as we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts on everything that we've discussed, whether it be podcasting or the Roman Empire, to kind of tie a bow in this?
Well, I think the thing that's important too is to realize like things aren't as bad globally as they were in late Rome. Like they definitely weren't. They aren't right now. So like we still have things we can do about it. So I think that's really cool. And I think the thing where podcasting fits into this is also you have to understand like people in that world, they were very affected of what happened to them, right? Because they didn't have the ability to communicate like we do now, the ability to have the conversations like we're having now. And I think that's the real empowering thing. Like this could be the first time in history that, countries start turning their economies around and go into a cooler age where we all get along and we can all trade and we can all do things in a better way because we have the ability to communicate and we have new mediums like podcasting. So I think it's really, really vital. And also as well, as you mentioned, we support people in that and we want to help people to have free speech, to get their company out, to make an impact. And we want to help people preserve their empires, not have an empire that falls. So we actually put together a really great white paper for your audience called Command Your Empire. And it's going to give them all the basic new media PR things they need to know to get out there, to create more attention and actually give them some usable steps they can start commanding their empire today and really preserving and protecting that. So if you head over to commandyourempire.com, they can grab that. And, we really just want to help people to have freer speech, to be able to promote their brand and to make a big impact out there.
Absolutely love that. And I'll be putting the link down in the show notes as well. Jeremy, thank you for being on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate this conversation. I think we got to talk about a lot of things in a way I don't usually get to talk about them. So I really enjoyed this.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much and have an amazing day.
Hey, you as well.